This week on the Frame Savers, anime girls make us feel feelings. Shoo-ba-da-doo-ba-da-doo-ba-doo.
This is episode 58 of the Frame Savers. Yes, 5-8. We've been doing this for, I think that calculates out to 7 or 8 years. Super excited to be doing this episode live on the Author Blues Twitch channel. If you're new to us, we are a speedrunning podcast that focuses on retro video games. Speedrunning is a hobby where you try and beat video games as fast as possible using whatever exploits and glitches and tricks that you can. And so this week we're excited to talk about a game, Shantae and the Pirate's Curse. But before we dive into all that, Chad, I need to check in on my buddy. How you doing?
I've been doing pretty good. I've been playing Kid Cool, which I feel like is, for most people, a cry for help. But for me, it's been consistently... it's really on-message content for my channel. I feel like people sort of expect that sort of self-harm kind of thing going on.
Sure.
So it's been...
I'll say when I feel down about where my life's at, it does feel good to just put on a Kid Cool stream and remember that, you know,
it could be worse.
Life can always be worse.
Life
can always be worse. And so I appreciate your contribution to my life.
It could definitely always be worse. I've been really enjoying it, and there's been a lot of good content. Hopefully the game wraps up pretty soon with a time that I'm happy with, so that I can stop playing it maybe forever, hopefully forever. What have you been up to lately?
I have been speedrunning a game called The Adventures of Star Saver for the Game Boy. We just released a pocket on that game today, fresh and free for the listening, costs $0. You can go download that. But yeah, I routed and learned that, and I've also been doing FF7 like usual, so mostly those things, and that's about it.
Nice.
I'm a simple man.
Well,
Game Boy and Final Fantasy. That's all I need.
We're very fortunate in this episode. I'm going to go ahead and spoil it. We're talking about Shantae and the Pirate's Curse, but obviously you guys read the episode titles, so this isn't going to shock you or anything.
And I already said it, so even more so.
Oh, I haven't listened to a word you've said for the entire episode.
That's fair.
I listen to the episodes for my voice, honestly. But we are visited here by our good friend Tina Hacks, and so I feel like it would be a disservice to us and to everyone if we didn't ask her, how have you been lately? What have you been up to?
I've been good. I picked up Final Fantasy VI recently, just under 2 months ago, and I last night got third place in the category I've been speedrunning, so that's been fun. And I feel like that's the responsible thing to do, what with AGDQ coming up and me doing that instead of grinding the speed game that I'm going to be running there.
Third place is one of the 5 best places you can get, so that's pretty
statistically
impressive. Yeah, that's awesome.
So I see that you're following in the rich and storied tradition of only practicing your GDQ game several days before GDQ actually arrives.
Well, it's tradition, and I wouldn't want to break that.
If you want to know when the last time I played Titanic was, you can check the date on my YouTube video for my PB.
There was a guy with a fiddle that was talking about tradition, so
I remember
that.
So we've got some community events going on. By the time this episode actually drops, you're going to be in the last days, but honestly, the best days of the really, really long-a-thon. It almost feels not worth it to mention, but you should be aware that the really, really long-a-thon, which is a marathon that's been going on now for about 2 weeks by the time this episode releases, it's meant to highlight runs longer than 4 hours, runs that don't typically make it in a lot of other marathons just due to length. It's been on twitch.tv/speedruns live. It's been really interesting. I kind of pop in there from time to time to see whatever games are going on, because it's a lot of games that you don't get an opportunity to see. But you should know, if you heard us talk about it last time, we talked about the fact that the marathon is sort of built around the idea of Batten Kaitos 100%, which is a run that basically culminates in waiting out a clock, an in-game clock for an item to transform. And so if you're going to catch it on the last day, you're going to finally see the much awaited, anticipated moment where that item transforms from one thing into another, and suddenly everyone is GGing for a reason you don't fully understand.
What do you know what the item is?
It's the something shampoo, the
shampoo?
Yeah, it's really important.
You're waiting that whole time for shampoo.
Yeah, it's like 300 and something in-game hours.
Ironic, because there's shampoo in the game that we're talking about today.
Is
So.
oh wow, it's almost like it was important for us to mention it for that reason as well. What else is going
Yes,
on?
well, Awesome Games Done Quick is a little marathon coming up in January 7th to the 14th. You can find that at twitch.tv/gamesdonequick. You probably know what that is, but it's a week-long marathon filled with the finest of speedrunners, such as the two people here and not myself. And so that'll be a lot of fun. It's supporting Prevent Cancer Foundation, so it's for a good cause. And it's going to be really awesome. I'm really excited for that to come, and we're all going to be hanging out. And we'll probably do our typical post GDQ episode where we just say the same things each time, but you all seem to love that episode quite a bit, so I'm excited about that.
I feel
So
like if we were
definitely
to
check
ever
that out.
stop doing that episode, there'd just be riots. It's just not possible.
Yeah, but it's a fun episode. It's a fun
Definitely.
episode. I like it quite a bit. So excited for that. We got Titanic from Author Blues. We got The Dragon Strap from Tina Hacks. Basically the only two games that anybody's going to watch. So definitely tune in for those, and we're excited about that. But this week, we're talking about Shantae, specifically Shantae and the Pirate's Curse. There's a lot of Shantae games. I think approximately 40 to 50 of them, or maybe like 7. I don't know. But why are we talking about Shantae and the Pirate's Curse?
Well, it's a fantastic speed game. We're lucky enough to have Tina Hacks here to talk with us about it. It's a game that I discovered. I think I discovered this game first. So this was the first one I had played, which is completely out of order. I think I played them in reverse order. But it's just such a fun series. I think it's a series that plays well to the typical retro game strength. So even though this game is pretty modern by most of our standards, this game really does fall well in line with a lot of the tenets and qualities of the retro games that we love so much, and it really does feel like a return to that sort of
I was
retro.
gonna say, but the people exclaim, "But Chad, this isn't a modern game." But you know, we've done this before. We did it with Azure Striker Gunvolt too. So you know, I don't know. You guys don't complain about anything. It's kind of great, actually.
Yeah, you guys seem
You
to
know,
like us, and I don't understand
it's just
why.
like you listen, you just check in, you listen, and you go away. It's perfect.
My
It's-
own
it's
parents
the
don't
best
like me as much as you guys do.
relationship. Yeah, man. I mean, on the internet, we'd expect a complaint or two.
Yeah,
but-
for real.
So, really excited to talk about this game. Listen to some fresh Shantae music, and then Chad's going to teach us about Shantae.
All right, so before we talk about specifically Shantae and the Pirate's Curse, it really benefits us a little bit to talk first about the history of WayForward games. So, WayForward was a company that got their start in 1990, and they produced their first game finally in 1994, Mickey's Ultimate Challenge, which I don't know if you guys have played this game. For some reason, it has this really weird cult following in the speedrunning community that I absolutely do not get. It's an educational game, and you run around as Mickey, and you have to deal with Goofy making you do mastermind puzzles and pattern matching
It's on the
on
Game
painting.
Boy. I just did it
Yeah,
for Game Boy.
it's terrible. There's
it
a
wasn't a
version for
game.
every console, but this is
I
way
gave
forward.
it like a 1.5 or something. I don't know. It was
It's-
literally like, here's a puzzle, and then
It's
you'd go find the next person. They'd be like, "Well, here's another puzzle."
yeah, it's real not good. That's my assessment of that game. It's real not good. So that's way forward for
I
you.
had no clue this had a cult following. You're blowing my mind.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, that's
So
interesting.
they restarted their game development business later in 1997 as a developer for hire on various titles. So they were working on a lot of different games basically as consultants, more or less, while simultaneously they were planning the release of their own IP, Shantae, which was on the Game Boy Color in 2002, which was 1 year after the release of the Game Boy Advance, which made it something of an obscure title. It's a pretty rare cartridge, isn't it, John? Like, I don't...
Yeah,
what does it go
it costs
for?
probably around $300 or so. I mean, it's
Wow.
the only Game Boy Color game that goes for like over $80 or so. And it goes for like $300. It's also, you'll see it on a lot of lists for games that kind of like push the hardware limits of the system, because it really does look like a GBA game on the Game Boy Color. It's really, really well done.
Was this the last Game
Um,
Boy Color game that ever got released?
I don't know about that.
I mean, that's
Yeah, I
pretty
don't
late
think
in the
that's
life
the
cycle,
case,
though.
but
2002.
knowing Game Boy Color, I'm sure games came out in like 2010 somewhere. But
That's true.
yeah, it's a later release for the Game Boy Color, and really the collectible Game Boy Color game. I mean, like games like Resident Evil Gaiden and Metal Gear go for like $40 to $60, and they're like the second most expensive. But this game sure goes for the money, and there's a lot of fakes out there, so be careful.
Yeah, it was released to really positive reviews despite being pretty under less popular than it really deserved, and it's
Yeah,
considered
I
to be
assume
one
not
of
a
the
lot of copies were made either, which is probably added to the rarity and cost, beyond it being also like one of 3 good Game Boy Color games that were.
yeah, the Game Boy Color library is
It's
particularly
rough.
strong in the shovelware category. I don't understand what it is about like Nintendo's middle years, but the Game Boy Color, the Nintendo 64,
Games so bad Chad won't run them.
yeah.
That's what they should have
There's just like
advertised.
so much shovelware. It's ridiculous. So the it was originally envisioned to be released on PC or PlayStation in full 3D, the original Shantae. But after pitching the game to WayForward's founder and owner Voldy Way, Game Boy Color version ended up getting greenlit. So we could have had Shantae shaking her hips in full 3D, but unfortunately it just
Dang.
did not end up working out that way. But the benefit of it was that WayForward had worked on a title previously called Extreme Sports, and the graphics engine for that game was able to be adapted to suit Shantae's needs, giving the developers more time to showcase some fairly rare effects for the Game Boy Color, like parallax scrolling and some transparency effects. So there were several sequels planned for this game. They had an idea for Shantae Risky Revolution on the Game Boy Advance, Shantae Risky Waters for the Nintendo DS, but ultimately none of these ever released, or rather maybe became the foundation for future sequels. So, Risky's Revenge was released in 2009. WayForward was announcing a new 3D installment episodic title that would be releasing in time for the holidays, 2009, and they called it Risky's Revenge. After delays, WayForward announced that the game would be releasing in North America in October of 2010, and they would end up dropping their episodic content plan and release the full game in one installment. So it's kind of interesting. You don't actually see these sorts of episodic installments very often, and it's interesting to know that Risky's Revenge was actually planned to be that.
Yeah, that's kind of strange. I mean, some games do that nowadays. They're usually more story-driven games.
It's pretty
that
much just
don't-
Telltale.
Yeah, Telltale games, basically stuff like Life is Strange and Walking Dead. But it's kind of weird to imagine like a platformer or something with that type of release schedule. The Pirate's Curse was announced in November 2012 in an issue of Nintendo Power. Shoutouts to Nintendo Power. Man, there were still issues of Nintendo Power in 2012. I missed out on so much Nintendo Power. And then information was later revealed at E3 2 years later in 2014. And so this was developed by WayForward Technologies for the Nintendo 3DS and the Wii U in late 2014, and for PC in 2015 in North America. Ultimately ended up with releases on Windows, Xbox One, and the PlayStation 4 as well. And so, like previous games in the series, Shantae and the Pirate's Curse puts players in the roles of Shantae, who's a half genie, and she attacks enemies by whipping them with her long hair. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, the gameplay.
Sold. That's
yeah,
it. That's all you need to know.
I feel
Episode
like
over.
I feel like the term ends up getting a lot of hate, but this game is a platformer in the style of a Metroidvania.
Definitely.
I feel like that term ends up getting a lot of eye rolls more often than not, but in general, it does play to the typical tenets of a Metroidvania. So there's some locations, events that are locked by plot elements, like you can't go to islands early, but the actual content in each level ends up mostly being locked by your gaining new abilities and skills, things like that.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting for me to see that because I've watched speedruns of this quite a bit, but a Metroidvania is not really clearly a Metroidvania when you play it that is, executing everything in the same order and such. But I didn't realize how many different things were, oh, wait, I need to get this ability to access this area. I need to get this item to access this area, and opens up the game that way. But that was kind of cool to see, I guess.
I feel
as
like the
was playing.
speedrun doesn't show that off very well, though,
No.
because pirate mode, you start the game with all of those abilities
Exactly.
and skills already. So seeing the way that the game intends you to sort of revisit past areas with new abilities and be able to unlock more things, you don't really get to see that as much, I think, in speedruns, because the typical mode being run is in pirate mode, which is New Game Plus.
Definitely.
So in the previous game, so this is sort of plays into the story a little bit. In the previous game, Shantae loses her genie powers. So Shantae must make use of various pirate items found throughout the game, including a pistol for ranged attacks, a hat that allows you to glide through the air, a scimitar for breaking blocks, boots that give Shantae the power to dash through walls, and a cannon for mid-air jumps. So throughout the game, Shantae travels from island to island, trying to gain access to, on each island, an evil den where one of the pirate items can be found and a boss can be defeated to find a map to access the next island. And so often the game has you returning to previous items to fulfill quests, or sometimes just to use the items that you gain to access new areas on those islands to make some sort of progress. So maybe finding a quest item or something like that. And throughout the game, there's shops that sell items that help in combat, such as these orbiting pike balls, for instance, or health potions. There's heart squids that you can find that you take back to, what's the name of the place? It's like a heart, it's a squid something, a squid forge.
A squidsmith?
Yeah, I don't remember what
Tina?
the thing is, Tina.
Does Tina know?
I don't, because even in the 100% run, you never go there.
Mm.
Never
you have
actually.
You have the world record for all heart squids. Do you never actually redeem them?
I've got the world record for that, and yeah, you don't go back to actually melt the squids down to get the extra heart.
Oh wow,
that's not important. All that matters is that you got the collectibles.
All right, okay.
I felt really bad, I'm not gonna lie, when I got my first 4 squids and I brought them to get melted down. Like, the person seemed really exuberant about what they were going to do to the squids, and they're very adorable, and I felt bad about it. I needed the extra hearts,
those
so I did it ultimately.
It's like
I did it, and I
just
washed
feel
it
bad
off
for
my
'em.
conscience.
So there's the heart squids, and you use them to increase your max health, and there's also cackle bats throughout the game that have dark magic that Shantae can collect in order to get the best ending.
Yeah, so let me tell you the story here. Let's have a little story time with
All right.
Carl's here. Dealing with life as a human in Sequin Island, Shantae awakens one day to the sound of her home, Scuttletown, under attack from the Ammo Baron. After discovering that the Ammo Baron has legally purchased the town from the mayor, Shantae returns home where she is confronted by her nemesis, Risky Boots, who blames Shantae for robbing her as her henchmen and items have gone missing. So that's the beginning of the game. Was that good? You like that, or?
No, that was good.
Okay.
I think that I can imagine a new career for you.
Yeah, I think I could do it.
In
but
a
there's
world.
only like one guy who does that. Yeah, there's only one guy who. Wait for. Maybe I can have a job. But yeah, Risky and Shantae deduce that the Pirate Master, who's a powerful evil tyrant, is trying to use dark magic to revive himself, and so Risky and Shantae begrudgingly team up. I'm guessing Risky was a bad guy in the previous games from the story that I was watching. I also assumed that I guess Shantae was a half genie, and now I'm not a half genie. I'm just a full human or something. I thought that was interesting. Maybe you can tell me more. And the dark magic is revealed to be Shantae's genie powers. Oh, spoilers. I haven't beaten it yet. Which she must recover to get the best ending, which is her recovering her powers. Well, now I know. Now I really want to collect that stuff then. Okay.
Yeah. Now you should go back. I think there's like a bad ending where Risky Boots is like, I'm gonna take all my items back, and Shantae's like, I should probably go get all my magic back, shouldn't I? And it feels like that's probably a really underwhelming ending. Like, hey, there's still more to do.
I think the
No,
worst
that's a
ending
good.
actually, she starts working at Walmart as a part-time employee,
That makes
and
sense.
then yeah, it gets weird from there. She gets into a lot of dark drugs and stuff.
Yeah, this game, one of the things that it gets the most praise
Dark,
for, I mean, the art is really solid. Like, I mean, just looking at
definitely.
this game is absolutely gorgeous, fantastic. We'll talk about this more in the next section, but the music is probably one of the things that this game gets raved about the most. And this game, the music was produced by Jake Kaufman, which I think he also produced the music for every previous version, right?
Yep. In
Uh,
fact, the first game I'm told is Jake Kaufman's first game that he
oh
did.
wow, yeah, the
Oh,
music for that
he did a
is
good job. He did a good job first time.
the music is incredible. Even as far back as the Game Boy Color version, you almost don't expect to be impressed by music on the Game Boy Color because let's face it, it's the Game Boy Color.
Hmm.
But it's fantastic all around, and it just gets better from game to game. You know, I played Pirate's Curse first, and then I played Risky's Revenge, and then I played Half Genie Hero, which I assume Jake Kaufman also did Half Genie Hero, right?
Yep, he did.
Yeah, so I mean, we're not really talking much about the games that released after this one, which by games I mean game, and by game I mean Half Genie Hero. But there's the music is just fantastic all the way through, and it's really worth a listen. We'll talk a little bit more about it. The game was released to critical acclaim. It's featured as one of the best sellers on the Nintendo 3DS. All of these games really were released to rave reviews. I can't think of any outright criticism that I've seen for any of the games in this series. I feel like it's definitely become much more appreciated since the Game Boy Color game kind of flew under the radar.
For sure. I mean, the Game Boy Color game has garnered a lot of interest by collectors, and then also just as wow, this is an actual really good Game Boy Color game. This is a game that most people didn't play when it came out, so I think a lot of retro people getting into retro video games have gone back and played this. Is this then the second of the Shantae games, or
No,
the
this is
third?
the third one.
This is the
So
third one.
what system did the second come out on?
It came out
Uh,
on the Nintendo DS, I believe.
it was
Oh,
Um,
okay.
DSiWare originally, which
yes,
is
that's
kind of where
right.
that episodic content was. They were planning on really leaning on the DSiWare platform for
That's
that.
right. It was iWare. I forgot
But
about
there's
that.
no physical release for the second game.
It was eventually released on PC.
Oh,
So,
okay, okay, yeah, because I
um,
don't know of any other, I guess, collectible Shantae game you can buy
I'm
a physical
pretty
copy of.
I'm
But
pretty sure much later, this game, Pirate's Curse, was re-released for the PlayStation 4 by Limited Run Games, and they printed
yeah, there's
like,
physical copies of 3DS one too. It's not just download thing.
well,
So
this one got released on PS4, and they released like, I think they printed just like 6,000 copies or something like that, no more.
yeah,
So if you got a copy of it, I guess you are holding a relatively rare item.
yeah. So do we want to just dive into our normal
Yeah, let's
ratings
just
and discuss the
jump right
game?
into the ratings.
Cool, let's do it. So graphics, what do you guys think? Tina Hacks, the lover of this game.
The graphics, I mean, it's already been said, but from the GBC on up, I've been impressed by them. They feel super solid all the way through. Thematically, everything ties together really well. In terms of the quality of animation, it's on par with games that had much larger budgets. I think that the
Mhm.
graphics are super good in this game.
Yeah, I'd say the beautiful game. Honestly, it's very colorful. The cutscenes, like when you're in conversations with people, and it kind of puts a copy of the person, like zoomed in like anime style, is really well done. It's very detailed. The levels, like the level design, like everything feels, like it fits within the same world, but like stands out still as their individual elements, whether you're like in the dark woods or you're in the palace or wherever you're at. So I love the graphics in this game. I think it's gorgeous.
Yeah, this game is particularly gorgeous. You reminded me of an anecdote that I read. They were talking about for the original Game Boy Color version, they actually built software to take full color animation and automatically convert it into Game Boy Color sprite work.
Hmm.
That is part of their process for generating the art on the Game Boy Color, and I think it really shows because I think that there's sort of a difference to what you can accomplish with that sort of work. Actually drawing out by hand and producing full color animation, and then later converting it back to Game Boy Color. I think there's a lot of people who really appreciate 8 and 16-bit sprite work and really think that that's the best medium to work in if that's going to be the final result. But I think that there's something to be said for actually having those tools that allow you to convert much more high quality artwork back into Game Boy Color art. I think that this game's absolutely gorgeous. I think I'm a sucker for some of the most simple elements. So for a 2D game like this, that's hand drawn, beautifully colored, even the most simple things like really high quality parallax scrolling. And this is the one that actually features the ability to like jump into and out of the background, right? Or am I thinking
No,
of
that's
Risky's
Revenge.
Risky's
Yeah,
Revenge?
that's not this one.
Yeah, so there's a lot that's actually done in this game series with trying to make the worlds feel really rich and vibrant. And so like with Risky's Revenge, being able to jump into and out of the background. But even with this game, like the really detailed parallax scrolling and the gorgeous backgrounds really don't draw anything away from the foreground as well. So I think it's really impressive.
It's probably worth noting, because this was designed, I guess, for the 3DS and stuff. I played it a little bit with the 3D turned on just to see, how that affected the graphics and stuff. It's okay. It's middling. I mean, a lot of different games do this where they kind of just tack on the 3D with the 3DS, and so like it's okay. I wouldn't recommend playing with it on, to be honest, but I mean, it's always cool when they're able to add that into a game that they've designed. So
I find most
going on,
3DS games to be mostly just headache generators.
yeah, I mean, some of them do it really well. I mean, this isn't one of those games that I would recommend doing it for more than a couple minutes. Some games like Mario 3D Land, like it works really well on. Some of the like Zelda remakes and stuff. This one not so much. When it comes to the music and sound, I love the music. Used to bug Tina to stream this game because she was in, I don't know, a country that's not America, whatever. It doesn't matter at that point. And so she was on different time schedule, and so she would be streaming at like 2 a.m. when I'd be finally going to bed before work. And so this was good, comfy music to listen to as I fell asleep. I love the music to this game. So, like we said before, Jake Kaufman, good work,
Yeah,
bud.
the music and sound design's fantastic. There's trying to remember, this is the one that includes like really simple voice clips as well, right? There's like
Yeah.
very basic things like that. I think that there's a lot of little elements that, I mean, of course it's hard not to just praise this game for the music, but I think that there's a lot of really simple sound design elements you can do that really enhance a game. And like, for instance, in this one, when there's conversations going on, there's sometimes very very simple, very basic sound clips. Like it's not full voiced dialogue, but it's really small things that I think really help this game shine in the way that it does.
Definitely. Shantae has a cute voice too. I'm gonna say that.
She does.
Yeah. Controls and gameplay. What do you? Tina should be the expert at this because you have to control this game, right? When you speedrun it, probably.
Usually.
Okay. Cool.
The controls are really really tight in this game, which it's super cliche to say about a speed game. Oh, it's got really tight controls. It feels really good to control, but this game is very very good at, especially because there's a few areas where you have to control to the pixel, and it's the controls feel responsive enough that you end up being able to, while going fast, control things to the pixel to do some of the skips that come along about halfway through the game, and then towards the end of the game, both of which could be run killers pretty easily if the controls were just a little bit more loose.
For sure. I'll say I haven't beaten this game. I played it for like 3 hours yesterday. So the gameplay, as we said, is kind of Metroidvania like. It did feel fairly linear, like fairly straightforward and obvious what to do next. So it's a pretty simple game. I don't think that's a bad thing, but it's not, you're not constantly trying to figure out where to go or what to do next. I think the combat's really good in this game. Like the enemies have patterns and are set up in rooms in ways where like you're gonna take damage, which I think is cool considering I played a lot of video games in my day, so like it was still challenging to do the combat. It wasn't just like run right through everything and it's easy. Like taking damage was pretty common and needing to use potions and stuff. I didn't actually die, but like there were definitely moments where I knew I was gonna have to use an auto potion or use a potion. And so I think the combat feels really good, including with the boss fights and stuff like that. And I like, I just like the combat in general. Like the hair whipping feels good. The upgrades make you feel better and more powerful and are really useful. And you're always trying to utilize what items you need to use too. Like saving your monster milk to power up before bosses and your pike balls and stuff like that. So I think the gameplay is really engaging and fun, if not maybe a little too linear.
I think that this is definitely the more linear of some of the Shantae games,
Mhm.
but I will say one additional comment just to not repeat what you guys have said already, but I am always impressed by the Shantae games, each one that I played one after another, that it felt like the controls were very consistent as well between the
Mhm.
games, even insofar as I sort of played them backwards. The most recent one and the last one that I played was the Game Boy Color one, so I played the original last, and I was surprised at how much my brain was able to already take the physics and the controls from the previous games I had played, which were the later games in the series, and they held up really well, which makes me
Sure.
think that if I had played them in the reverse order, your experiences with playing the Game Boy Color game and getting comfortable with that physics, it seems like that would be a very difficult task to achieve, and that they achieved it well, that it feels like it's more or less the same physics engine between all of them. Is I
I could
guess
definitely
my
see
point.
that. It kind of ties into fun and replayability, which is our next topic. But in terms of the gameplay, there's also a decent amount of extra stuff it seems you can do. Not like an overwhelming amount, but kind of like a Zelda, like a classic Zelda amount, where it's like, well, I could get all the heart squids, I could get all the dark magic, and all of this, and I liked that. Specifically, the way they implement it, I feel like makes you want to get it. It doesn't feel cumbersome or like needless, like for example the dark magic. Like I wanted to get all of the dark magic because I didn't, well, until this podcast, know why I was trying to get it or what it did, so that was kind of cool. The heart squids are obviously like make it a lot easier to do combat when you get an extra heart, because you start out with only 2 hearts, and um you don't end up with like a whole huge ton of health, so getting an additional heart makes a big difference. So I really liked the side stuff that you could do, and it seemed like there were a couple different things that weren't necessary to beating the game, but were things that I would actually want to go back and do, which I think is a big compliment to a game when it can, I guess, add a collectathon or add something of that sort, but make it not feel like a collectathon.
This game does a really excellent job of dangling the carrot, which is
Yeah.
exactly like you'll see a heart squid in a wall in a dungeon, and you're like, well, I don't know what I was going to be doing for the rest of the day, but I've got my afternoon planned out now. I'm getting that heart squid, which I think
Yeah.
is really a testament. Like, there's a lot of times that you'll find in a game where it says, there's this thing that you could go find. I remember in Super Metroid, there was a room that was hidden that you kept passing by, and I was like, I could not care less if I ever find that. But there's something to be said about a game that's good enough that when it dangles the carrot, you're like, I'm interested, I'm sold,
Wow,
let's go.
shots fired on Super Metroid.
I loved Super Metroid.
Clearly the inferior game to
Well, the thing
Shantae.
is that I enjoyed Super Metroid, but after a while, it's like, okay, there's another missile upgrade. I'm not sure that I really need to spend the next
Yeah,
20 minutes
I,
trying to hunt it
I have a
down.
billion missiles. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah, I think it's cool too. I mean, it's typical Metroidvania where you see one in a spot where you're like, well, I don't have the ability to get that yet, but I will later, and I'm gonna try and remember and come back. I do like also that it like on the map it tells you how many squids and how many dark magics are in each level and marks them off for you so that you don't have to blindly just wander around maybe you've gotten everything in one world but you don't know it yet, and so you're just exploring and wandering around for no reason. I do like when games kind of help you keep track of that, similar to like Mario Odyssey, where you can hit the Y button, see, oh, there's 80 stars in this world, so, or 80 moons, so I know how many more I need to get, as opposed to just wandering. So I don't know. I thought that was cool. It definitely felt like it had a decent bit of replayability. Also, there's other modes that open up, as we'll talk about in this, probably more in the speedrun discussion. But pirate mode, which is kind of one of the main speedrun modes, you get all of the power ups to begin the game, which is a cool new way to approach the game, not having to go and find each item to open up new areas, but rather just having all of them to start with. So I think that's pretty.
It feels like it was designed for speedruns in mind, which is kind of nice to see
Yeah, which
something like that.
seems like a lot of modern games do. Like, I mean, we talked about Azure Striker Gunvolt 2, which already timed your levels, but also gives you like incentives for beating levels fast and stuff. It's cool to see how speedrunning has kind of affected modern gaming, or not even speedrunning as like the community, but just that it's the idea of beating levels as quickly as you can or games quickly as you can has become more prevalent in kind of unlocking or adding additional content to games.
I think there's a lot of games out there that have in mind I'd really like for people to speedrun this game, and so they try to come up with I feel like we've talked about this in the past. Games try to figure out a way to make a game more speedrun accessible or speedrun friendly, and so they come up with this idea of, well, what would a speedrunner want, and so we can make a speedrunner mode. And most people say, the things that you want from a speedrun mode is, be able to skip dialogue, put an in-game timer in the game or something like that. But I think a lot of games get it wrong. I think a lot of games are like, well, what if we just add shortcuts? Here's a long part of the game. What if we just made it so that there's like a hole in this wall and you can skip the whole thing? People are like, well, we kind of wanted to make that up on our own, not you give it to us.
We want to break the wall. We don't want it to already be broken for
right.
us.
And so I think that games like this do a really good job of finding the right way to, assuming that the idea in the first place was ever about speedrunning or, just something like that. I feel like games like this that sort of give you early skills, the typical New Game Plus fodder, I've always liked that for a speedrun mode where it's like, no, we're not letting you skip the whole game. No, we're not letting you sequence break in hugely significant ways, but you don't have to hunt down this skill. You can do this thing early because you had the skill early. Things like that.
Yeah, and I'm sure that affects how you speedrun the game, right, Tina? I mean, we don't have to talk about the speedrun discussion, but like, did you beat this game casually first and do pirate mode, or how did you get into pirate mode?
So I played this game casually first, and it was super fun. Speaking to the point that was made regarding this game feeling like it was made with speedrunning in mind, there's a story that I think is really indicative of WayForward and how they interact with the speedrunning community, where there's a trick that we're going to be discussing a little bit later on called the Risky Shuffle. And with an update, they actually changed the way that move behaved. And so the speedrunning community at the time reached out to them and said, hey, we've been doing this thing. We're using it to speedrun the game and to skip some of the content. Your update, broke what we were doing. And if possible, we would really appreciate if you could maybe revert it, maybe even turn it into an option. And so at that point, a company being told, hey, there's a bug in your game, we're abusing this bug. There's a decent number of companies that would take that and say, oh, thank you for letting us know. We'll fix that right away and just patch it out. But they went and reverted the change, made it so that it was the same, for whoever's running the game on whichever version.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear stories like that. That's not the only time I've heard a story like that. And I think we all have heard different stories of more modern games getting broken and something getting patched out. And, we hear these kind of stories at GDQs a lot, I think, for games that I would never know anything about if I weren't watching GDQ. But it's just cool because you would think that the developers and speedrunners would kind of be on opposite sides of that argument. And that, what does it benefit a company like WayForward to, help the 10 people trying to speedrun the game, like, a lot, or whatever game it may be, even if it's 50 people compared to the, hundreds of thousands of copies they're selling. It's really cool that they, are willing to do that.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's a testament to the fact that, their creation of it was a labor of love and that they're willing to give back to another group who is, equally loving their game. And not just that, I mean, even from a marketing or economic standpoint, it's like these are even if there's only 10 speedrunners or 20 speedrunners, these are like the 10 people left on Twitch still playing your game. So it's like, well, we want them to continue streaming our game and making...
I mean, even if your game like Mario Odyssey with 500 submitted speedruns, I mean, compared to the number of copies you're selling, like that's less than 1%. I mean, it's a small part, but it's cool that they still appreciate that. So we skipped over, and by we I mean myself, difficulty and fairness. So I've only beaten a third of this game, so I don't think I can really speak to this because I assume the game ramps up in difficulty gradually. So do you want to speak to kind of how this game is in terms of the difficulty?
Yeah, I'll let Tina lead this one.
Sure. Casually, the game has a pretty gentle curve, straight up to the end. It's really good at teaching you, very gently what a move is going to look like, and then putting you in situations where you have to use that tech, and it gets progressively more dangerous. Due to the way that the game tends to punish you, which is generally speaking, even if you do something like fall into some spikes or fall into a bottomless pit, it's going to start you at the beginning of the room rather than give you a full-on game over. The difficulty curve tends to be pretty forgiving overall.
Yeah, I liked that the pits that you are not supposed to jump in have little skulls floating out of them. It was something that I figured I'm not going to jump in that pit. It has skulls flying out of it. So that was nice because then the ones that don't have that, you're like, oh, I can jump down and access a different area. I thought that was cool. And then if you do happen to fall into one of those, you lose a quarter of a heart and start at the beginning of the room. As opposed to most games, you lose a life, you have to go back to last save, whatever it may be. I thought that was really cool. I think this game also would present you could make your own challenge in this game in terms of you can go ahead and get a bunch of squid upgrades and get the shampoo and become more powerful, use pike balls, use monster milk, or you could just challenge yourself and stay at a lower amount of hearts and less items. So the game kind of allows you to be able to challenge yourself if you'd like, I think, as well.
I just want to point out that you mentioned, you were praising the fact that Shantae sort of telegraphs which of the pits are, death and which of the pits actually lead somewhere. Just want to point out that Kid Cool actually does that first. And I'm not saying Kid Cool's a good game, but I am saying you praised it here. So I just want to make sure that we're sort of on the same page about, that being a good feature, making a good game.
Yeah, there's a good feature in Kid Cool.
Nice.
Yeah. Congrats.
Yeah, I do think that this game, compared to some of the other games in the Shantae series, mostly just because this game tends to be more linear, I feel like it's hard to feel like this game is harder. Like even if the process of just making you hunt around for an hour to figure out what that thing you forgot about was, even if that's not necessarily difficult, it definitely instills in you a feeling of being frustrated and maybe at least feels like artificial difficulties to a certain extent. And I think that one of the things that this game brought to the table was because sort of unlocking stages was slightly more linear, even though you do have to return to old levels nonetheless. I feel like some of that is taken out. So instead of making you feel frustrated because it's like I have to hunt in all the locations I could possibly use this new item, and for instance, like in the Game Boy Color version, that might involve traversing from one side of the map to the other, which is just already super frustrating. You can just get on your boat and hop around from island to island and say, what's new here, what's new here. And so I think that sort of thing reduces the frustration, which itself, because you're already not frustrated, means that when you finally do approach new content, you get into a new dungeon and things like that, you have a fresh outlook on it, and so it makes it a little bit easier by virtue of that.
Yeah, and you can also get the item that calls the ship right to you. What is that called, Tina?
Those are pirate flares.
Pirate flares. So like you don't have to backtrack all the way through. Just buy some of the pirate flares for exploring. When you're in a dungeon, it tells you which areas you've already visited and which you haven't, which is always really nice, especially for Metroidvania. So I did appreciate those things. I did get the feel, maybe going a little bit back to replayability before we go overall rating, that once I beat this game once, I don't know if I would be compelled to beat it again if I was not speedrunning it. But I mean, I think that's pretty typical of most platformers, but that this did add as much as it could for a platformer that would try and make you come back and play it, I guess.
I think that's relatively true of a lot of the Shantae games, is that aside from just 100%ing the game and collecting all of whatever the collectible is in that game, or, for instance, in Half Genie Hero, collecting all the artwork and things like that, outside of things like that, there's not really a totally compelling reason to replay it. It's not like a Mega Man game where you can play it 5 different ways. It's like, it's Shantae. Yeah. You're gonna play it mostly the same way. I feel like pirate mode probably offers at least a different enough experience that it'd be worth playing it maybe one more time.
Yeah, for sure. So moving on from that, I'm not going to give this an overall rating. Beating it, I don't think that's fair, but I want to know what your guys' overall ratings are.
This is a really strong game. I mean, this was my introduction to the Shantae series and definitely was a huge motivator for me to want to hunt down more of the games in the series and try them out. So I think I'm going to be naturally inflated because this was my first experience with it and I was kind of marveling at it as I was playing. So I'm going to say 7.5. I feel like
seems fair. That's what I was leaning towards, but I mean, I haven't beaten it. So.
It's a really, really strong game. I mean, we talk about on this podcast, we don't do the 8 to 10 IGN scores, but it's like, I feel like 7.5 is a really strong rating. I don't feel like I have to defend it, but at the same time, I want to make it clear that, I mean, that is, I really praise this game for being as good as it is. It's fantastic.
For sure. Tina, your chagrin is showing on your face.
No, I wrote down my
14?
rating.
14
No,
out
I
of
wrote
10?
down my rating ahead of time
Okay.
because I didn't want to be influenced by anybody else going first.
Okay.
And I wrote down 7.5.
Oh, okay. Wow, that's what I was thinking as well.
Yeah, for a game that I speedrun, I felt that it was really possible that that could have been invaded. But just on a scale from 0 to 10 and using the whole scale, it's a tremendously strong game, and it's one that keeps me coming back to it. I think that there are definitely games that surpass it in pretty much any of the categories that we could consider. But overall, it is just a super solid, fun game that does make you want to come back.
For sure. I will say this. I love doing this podcast. I want to put that out there first. There's a couple things I hate doing when it comes to this podcast. One is posting the episodes. I hate doing it. I hate typing the little things. I just tweeting, and it's just very frustrating. The other thing I hate is when I have to play a game like the day before I do a recording, and I'm just like, even though playing video games is one of my favorite things, when it's done under obligation, like it immediately becomes something I don't like. And I had a lot of fun playing this last night. I definitely didn't, feel frustrated that I had to play it or whatever. I wanted to keep playing more, and I completely get the love for this game. I mean, my playthrough was a bit different than a complete blind playthrough because I've watched the speedrun so many times. So I had ideas of what to do, like what upgrades would be useful and where to go. But yeah, it's a super solid game. Strong recommend for me.
I mean, that's
for any
probably
platformer fan.
That's probably appropriate, though. I mean, if you're going to spend 3 hours, I mean, you probably got more out of that playthrough than anyone's ever gotten out of 3 hours playing this game.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Sure.
I think
that's assuming I'm good at games.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem.
I think that this game, it's a great introduction. I have a question for you, Tina, just because it kind of, I just kind of thought of it just now. Would you say, if you were going to recommend one game as someone's introduction to the series, would this be the game that you would choose, or do you think that there's another one in the series that would make a better, try this one first, and if you like it, then you're going to be hooked on the Shantae series?
Yeah, that's a weird one for me. I think that overall this is the most fun of the four. That said, this is also the least like the other three. The other three are fairly similar in terms of gameplay. I think that I would probably tend to recommend Half Genie Hero first.
Okay.
We talked about how linear this game is. It came immediately after Risky's Revenge, which was the least linear, and it got of all the things that people tended to complain about, that was the thing that kept on getting brought up. So I think it's not a surprise that we had a linear follow up.
Right.
But I think Half Genie Hero is probably the one that I would say try this one out. If you like this, you'll probably at least like Shantae and Risky's Revenge.
Right.
It's hard to say that Pirate's Curse is really one that's going to be indicative of whether or not you're going to like the rest of the series, though.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's the difference between sort of that open world aspect and the game sort of allowing you to be chauffeured around on your boat. So, but aside from that, I think the
recommend
gameplay.
an introduction to the Shantae series, of which I've only played one game for 3 hours. I'd recommend Kid Cool.
Nice. I'm writing that down.
Okay.
You'll be the first person to ever praise that game.
Let's go ahead and take a quick break, and then we're going to have Tina tell us all things speedrun. So as always, we've talked about the game, just playing it, just having fun. And now we're going to dive into the speedrun where you don't have fun. You just play it over and over again until you cry. So this game has a lot of categories. A lot of categories. Think about how many categories you think it has. It has a lot more than that. Every single category it has 4 different versions of it. It has normal mode, out of bounds, normal mode, no out of bounds, and then pirate mode, out of bounds, pirate mode, no out of bounds. So there's an any percent with all 4 of those. There's 100% with all 4 of those. There's all dark magic with all 4 of those. There's all heart squids with all 4 of those. And there's something called DMHS, which I'm pretty sure is just made up just to make me type out more words.
Dark
and
magic,
that also
heart
has
squids.
all 4 of those. Oh, that's dark magic and the squids. Okay.
Tina, you had like a knowing smirk when he was talking about the categories. I have to ask, how many of the categories are your fault?
Who, me?
Yeah. How many of the categories?
No, I came into this game quite late into the speedrunning scene. They were all the categories were already laid out. I picked the one slice of the tremendous number of categories that we have. And I said, these are the ones that I'm going to grind down.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a lot. Right. It's a lot of things.
I knew you had done heart squids, and I couldn't help but think, I wonder if Tina invented this.
Yeah.
No, thankfully, I am not to blame for any of this. You can blame somebody else.
Perfect.
This is maybe this only applies to degenerates like Chad, myself, and like 5 other people listening to this. But like when I go to a leaderboard on speedrun.com and I see it like this, where there's just so many things, I'm just like I can't run this game. There's just too many options. That's how, like, Resident Evil is like one of my favorite games. We talked about that episode with Carsey, and you go to that speedrun.com page and you're like, holy smokes, like I could run it on like 9 different systems at like this many frame rates. It's just, I don't know. I just like
it's too much.
But sometimes you have to. Sometimes
it's the danger of choice. You know, you give me one you give me 1 or 2 options, and I can choose between them. You give me 30 options, and I'm just frozen.
Yeah. So I'll give you some of the time. So the any percent pirate mode world record is by TYK619. You're going to see that name a lot with a 4051, and then Takenator with a Takenator 7 with a 4206. Then there's any percent pirate mode no out of bounds, which is TYK619 with a 5103, and then our amazing host and lovely guest Tina Hacks 5333. And then if you just go to all the other leaderboards, it's mostly just TYK 619 and then some other people. But it's most he I think there's like 2 of these, I don't know, 16, 20 categories that he doesn't have the world record in and just hasn't submitted a run in. But yeah, TYK 619. He has a lot of good times.
Yeah, the general understanding in this community is that any time that any of us have a world record, it's because so TKY tends to just go by Turkey. It's because Turkey has allowed us to have it for now.
Wait, is it TKY and not TYK? Did I mix it up?
It is TKY. Okay. So he tends to go by Turkey, and it's entirely because of the fact that he's allowed us to have those world records. They are very much borrowed, not owned.
Very kind of him. Very kind. So the major speedrun categories for this are pirate mode. Would you agree? Is that true? Not true? Or just tell us what categories matter.
For the most part, the pirate mode tends to be the more speedrun categories. You will find, especially lately, JT Norimaki doing a lot of normal mode speedruns, though, particularly with out of bounds. The pirate mode can have some pretty good movement, both out of bounds and no out of bounds. The normal mode speedruns do tend to focus just on the out of bounds categories. Okay.
So before we dive into kind of just the normal tech of what you see in most of these runs, what are the out of bounds tricks for this run? What does that entail, and how much of the game does it break? What does it allow you to do?
Sure. So if you use a curative item, anything that causes you to have an animation right on the edge of a screen transition, you can force the game into this kind of weird state where it doesn't know where you're supposed to be and it doesn't trigger the screen transition, and your physics go a little bit weird. So you can use that to pass through locked doors without purchasing keys. You can use that to fly. You can go up very long vertical shafts, for example. There's a couple of spots that you'll see that used in the out of bounds run, and that ends up just skipping a tremendous amount of content overall.
That's frustrating because I never know where I'm supposed to be or what I'm supposed to do, and I don't benefit from it at all. No cool sequence breaks there, so that stinks. So most of what we're going to be talking about is basically pirate mode, and the different tech movements, notable bosses, stuff like that. So what kind of tech do we expect to see if I'm sitting down and watching you do just a pirate mode run?
Sure. So the one thing that you can't get away from is a trick called the risky shuffle. I mentioned
Yeah.
that a little bit earlier. So this game tends to be played on uh, DualShock controller, Xbox controller, those type of controllers where you're going to have both a D-pad and an analog stick available to you. So if you hold left on one of those and right on the other, you find that one of those directions overrides the other. And you're able to use that to kind of wiggle back and forth in a very short space. And you can build up the speed from Risky's boots in that small space. And you can get speed in areas that you're not meant to have had speed. And you
Okay.
can use that to skip some spots and just to be able to go fast in general.
And just to point this out, since we didn't mention it, I assume most of these runs are done on PC.
For the most part, PC. The PlayStation 4 version is also the PC and PlayStation 4 are about the same speed.
Okay.
You will occasionally encounter Wii U runs. The Wii U has the benefit of not needing to drop into the menu to use items.
Sure.
You have to pause the game otherwise for PC or PS4. Unfortunately, load times end up, even with that advantage, making it slower.
Oh wow.
that's
Yeah, because
rough.
the 3DS also, you just have the menu right below you. I assume almost nobody runs it on 3DS, especially because of the shuffle, because you don't have dual. I mean, I guess you have the little stick if you have an XL, but nobody runs anything on 3DS,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
I can't
It's too
say that
hard.
I've seen any
Nintendo,
runs
give us
on
an
it.
HDMI out. Just do it. And
Yeah,
make
give
me
us
happy.
HDMI out for their dead peripheral.
Hey, they're still making games. They're still making games. So, what about momentum boots?
Okay, so that's a trick. I'm gonna go ahead and just put this out there. Almost all the tricks that I mentioned, that I'm going to mention, are going to be there. There's one person who's really the scientist of Shantae, uh, Ezco. Almost all these tricks are going to be Ezco's fault. Um, Ezco has been really great at breaking pretty much all of the Shantae games. So momentumless boots. There are some spots where when you have running speed, when you would run through a screen transition, there would be a wall that you would run into if you just continued holding forward and you tried to jump. It turns out that if you let go of forward, you jump, and within one frame of that, you press forward again, you can keep your running speed without having to do another risky shuffle to gain it back. Saves you a couple seconds each time that it can be used, and it can be used two, maybe three times in the run. Two for
Okay.
sure.
Cool.
Interesting.
And then so when you're starting out with pirate mode, the different abilities you have, like how do you use around the level quickly? Because that's a big thing I noticed, different from playing it casually to watching you do pirate mode. Is it was with you having all these different abilities, a lot of them make you go a lot faster, such as like the cannon, jumping, and stuff like that.
Sure. So the two things that you're going to use the most are going to be the boots, of course, because you're dashing, and it turns out dashing is fast,
Hmm.
and the cannon because that helps you to ascend vertical spaces quickly. Occasionally, you'll find that using the hat helps you just to time things, but it's relatively rare that the hat is absolutely required.
Okay. And then you can also gain height with the hat and with the cannon in certain situations. Is that right?
That's correct. There's only one spot in the run that you tend to do that, which is right towards the end. Uh, I forget the number of frames. It's not frame perfect. It's you have a 2 or 3 frame leeway, but you use the hat and cannon jumps in succession to manage to skip a pretty large amount of the end dungeon and go straight to the final fight. Of course, if you're running out of bounds, you can just go out of bounds and uh, fly up to the top anyway.
That's sequence breaking, I assume, like not intended.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. So I think this game is really easy to break down into the fact that there's a lot of movement going on, just optimizing your movement throughout different areas, just like most speedruns. And then there's a lot of RNG and combat. So let's dive into the RNG for a second, because I think that's a real key part of watching this run and I guess getting a run off the ground. So what of RNG elements are we looking at here?
Okay, so in terms of RNG, early on, there's a few drops that you want to get. There are some power ups that you can pick up, which were mentioned earlier: Monster Milk, Pike Balls, things along those lines. Uh, if you can get Monster Milk or a Pike Ball really early, it'll save you some time. Uh, rarely going to make or break a run unless you're at Turkey's level, honestly. But it's certainly not going to hurt. In addition to that, there's a really early boss, the first boss that you face, the Ammo Baron, where the absolute best versus the absolute worst RNG, just in terms of the patterns that you get, is multiple minutes of time that you can lose.
Wow. For just one boss?
Yeah, so
Just
the boss,
the first boss, yeah.
basically the boss shoots a cannon right at you in fast speed that you cannot deflect back, or a bouncy shot, which I don't. Why does the tank have the bouncy shot? I don't know. It doesn't seem to do very much, but you can shoot that back and knock the ammo baron out. So you're kind of in a Link to the Past blue ball situation of you get one outcome or the other, and one lets you damage him and one doesn't.
So it turns out you got really lucky in your blind playthrough, I think, because there's another attack where the ammo baron can just rush you with the tank.
Oh no, I've had
slam
that
the
as
tank
well.
into-
Yeah,
Okay.
that. Okay, yeah.
So you can get really unlucky with 4 of those in a row, and then 2 of the fast shots before you see a single red is the color of the ball that you can bounce back.
Luckily, right in the beginning of the run, so
Yeah,
obviously
so,
it makes it a lot easier to be able to reset. Yeah, as opposed to, I'm just saying, if this was the end of the run, lose a minute and a half to it, I mean, that would be pretty brutal.
Yeah, so let's bring up the second to last boss, which is the other major RNG boss, where the boss is called the Steel Maggot, and it runs out, and you can hit 2 of the 3 little lights on its back, and there's a random sequence of those lights that need to be lit up in order. If you get it wrong, they all reset. It shoots at you and it runs off. And for each cycle, you can only hit 2 max at a time. So you've got 4 cycles in the best case, and these are not particularly quick cycles.
Mm-hmm.
And then on top of that, of course, your best chance is going to be killing it just in 2 cycles of having everything lit up properly. If you don't manage to get that damage, then you're losing, again, minutes.
Oh man, that stinks. Well, that sounds like a really cool 80s metal band, Steel Maggot. I mean,
that does sound like
that's
a good metal
band
name.
Yeah, like I'd listen to Steel Maggot probably.
Sounds like hair metal.
Yeah, I mean, I don't listen to hair metal, but I mean, it's a cool name. I don't know. So you also have money RNG to get certain items that will help you in the run. Because the money drops are random. I think, are they also random in the different jars and pots you can break and stuff too?
They're not. There are jars that we know that we want to always hit in our route, and that helps us to mitigate some of that RNG.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to end up being cases, however, where we can get just a little bit more to power things up and to save some time, or we just can't afford it.
Sure. So I guess we didn't really talk much about the items in the casual discussion, but I guess the 2 biggest ones are, you can get pike balls or super pike balls. These are like maces basically that circle around you and do damage, while you can also do damage and hit different enemies. And then there's monster milk and super monster milk, which allow you to do more damage than you normally would for a set period of time. So both of them last like, I don't know, 30 seconds or so, I would say. So those are used on a lot of the different bosses and a lot of different areas of the game to fight. Why don't you tell us just, I guess, a bit about like the notable combat? Like, most of the combat that is notable are the bosses. What are your strategies going into these boss fights that you are trying to do to get them done as quickly as possible?
Sure. So most of the time, any boss that you're going to be facing is thankfully just you want to do as much damage as possible. You don't have to worry about, doing the right amount of damage per cycle or anything like that. Just where the HP, get the HP sponge down as quickly as you can.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of fights where that's not quite the case. The first one being there's a giant spider that you fight, where the goal is going to be in the speed run, particularly in the pirate mode run. You've got 3 cannon shots total. And what you want to do is, after your 3rd cannon shot, you want to take damage and then time a hair whip so that it actually ends up resetting your cannons. So you can just stay in the air and whittle the spider down. Otherwise, you have to wait for the spider to drop so that you can hit it. And that tends to be a fair bit slower. Other than that, one thing that you will see, particularly in the very final fight, is jumping while you're hair whipping. If you jump right after a hair whip, it resets your animation, so you can get damage out just a little bit faster. You use that to set up a quick kill on the final boss.
Oh wow, cool. Yeah, the I would like to say the Empress Spider is like really cool looking sprite. It's really awesome fight. But yeah, that is really cool because that fight is a lot of waiting at the bottom of the screen for the enemy to come down and let you attack it. So, um, I don't know. The combat in this game is definitely cool to watch, but probably a lot of intricacies that you might not notice as a casual viewer of the speedrun that you might want to see there. Are there any other like notable parts of the speedrun that you want to like point out, or anything you have to say about the speedrun as a whole?
So the other thing that has to be mentioned is there's something of a meme in Shantae speedrunning, and not just this game, but if risky or if
You love memes, don't you? I bet you do.
I do, memes are pretty fantastic. If Roddy Tops is involved, it's usually going to be something that your run. In the original Shantae, there was a race that's just absolutely horrible, and in Shantae and the Pirate's Curse, there's this part where you have to carry Risky
Yeah,
through
I
a bunch of
mentioned
instant kill enemies, and it's just delightful. It starts off with actually something that's worth mentioning: an enemy that's basically RNG, where if you're holding right, sometimes you get past it, and sometimes you don't, with no difference in your speed. And then after that, just a lot of really really intricate platforming that you do to avoid all of these instant death enemies.
Yeah, I'll say this is my favorite part of the run to watch, and I don't know why we haven't mentioned it up to this point. But basically, and this ticked me off because I want to say that watching the speed run, I don't know what's happening in the story. When you get to the end of this whole section of running Roddy Tops through the whole thing, you find out that she's fine and she didn't need you to carry her the whole time, and she was just playing a trick on you, and that wasn't cool, Roddy Tops. Not cool. Didn't appreciate what you did there. But yeah, essentially everything that you hit is a one hit death. Although like you just start at the beginning of the screen, you don't have like a set number of lives or anything. But for speedrun purpose, obviously getting killed, especially there's one screen that's fairly long where if you die, you're getting sent back like a good 20-30 seconds, something like
Yeah.
that. I mean, it's a decent chunk of time. It's intense. There's RNG elements as to what enemies will ways, whether they'll shoot or not shoot. There's cycles that you're trying to meet, and everything is obviously high risk because it's one hit and you're dead. So I don't know. I like that section a lot. It's pretty high intensity, and I think my favorite part to watch for sure. I don't know. That's all I have to say about that. I'm sure it's not your favorite part to run, but it's my favorite part to watch.
I definitely remember playing Run Run Roddy Tops during my blind playthrough, and it was probably the longest 30 minutes of my life, just doing it over and over and over and over again.
Yeah, I'll say that was probably the one thing that I benefited the run it so many times. I think I died like 4 times, which isn't too bad. And I knew what most of the patterns were and most of the stuff coming up because it was ingrained in some part of my brain. I didn't know it was there until it popped up. But I was like, I've seen all of this so many times. So I appreciate that because I didn't.
So you did all the speedrun strats then?
Oh yeah, definitely. I just kept holding left or right. No, I stopped a lot. I will be honest, but it's still hard even when you're doing it as slowly as you can. Because it's easy to mess up. So, yeah. Any any last thoughts on like if you're selling somebody on watching this run or possibly considering picking it up? Like, what would you say to that person?
The last thought that I have on the speed run is that no matter which of the categories you pick, the movement is just top notch. This is a game that, while the developers didn't end up doing, the cheap ways of making something speedrunning friendly that we mentioned before, just by focusing on good movement and good level design, they managed to make a game that was really, really pleasant to speedrun.
Definitely. Will I ever have comfy late night Shantae and the Pirates Curse streams to fall asleep in? Will you be returning?
Probably,
Will you returning to
yeah.
the game?
Oh yeah, I've recently come back to it, and
Nice.
I have. So a good friend of mine, Roguelink, who's also been on
Heard of him.
TFS.
Second ever guest on the Frame Savers podcast, I'd like to point out.
Yeah. So
In the
he's
Hall of
recently
Fame.
picked it up, and I have agreed to stay rusty so that when we meet up at AGDQ, we can do races with brand new speedrunner to the game and super rusty, almost entirely second place runner now to the game.
Nice. I'm looking forward to seeing those races. So we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and then we are going to be able to answer your live on the internet
So we are very fortunate to be doing this episode live once again, and one of the things that we really love about doing these episodes live is the ability to collect questions from our viewers. So we've been having a pretty good crowd here hanging out with us while we've been recording this, for those of you who are just listening to the audio version. And we've gotten a lot of good questions along the way, so we're going to do our best to answer as many of them as we can. So to start off with, Casey asks, I've been thinking about playing a Shantae game recently, so what parts of Shantae do you like/dislike as a speed game? So this one I think is really best for Tina, since me and John know nothing about speedrunning this game. So,
how dare you?
That's fair. This particular Shantae, perhaps. It's worth noting that Auth has done speedruns of Half Genie Hero where I haven't. One of the things that I would say if we were talking about Shantae as a whole is that every single game has movement and tech that feels different. So even if you don't like one of them, you can take a look at another one and that one might click with you. Other than that, just in general, I really enjoy the amount of fluidity that this particular speed game tends to have. Once you have started grinding the game down, most of the movements feel very fluid, and that every time that you manage to pull it off, any individual section just feels very, very satisfying to manage.
I would say that possibly something you would dislike is there's a decent amount of RNG in this game, which is obviously not for everybody who likes speedrunning.
yeah, I wonder how
think
much.
that's fair to say.
I wonder how much RNG some of the other games have. I don't really know how. I mean, I got out of. I did Half Genie Hero when it first came out, and I was just having fun with it. But the game definitely got a lot more improved, sort of after I stepped out, as I usually do. And so I wonder how much of a factor that plays in it. I mean, all of these games have drops, random drops from enemies. So I wonder what sort of what that actually plays into it. Have you done speedruns of Risky's Revenge as well? I can't remember.
I have.
You have? Would you say that?
So,
would you say that that one has similar types of RNG that affect the run?
So the run that is the most popular is any percent,
Okay.
which is a quite short run. So let me tell you a story about that game. There's a fight that starts. You start the game in a fight,
Okay.
which is pretty normal. It's kind of what Shantae does. And you need to collect 40 gems, otherwise you just reset.
She's a scrappy broad.
40 is 40 very difficult to pull off? Like, are you resetting there a lot, or is it just kind of annoying
One
that
out
it's so
of
early?
10 runs.
Oh, nice.
I'm gonna get out of the first 50 seconds of the game.
That's rough. Just
So,
10
yeah,
minutes to kick a run off.
Yeah, it's a really, really reset heavy point. Of course, there are routes that you could use that if you don't care about necessarily cutting a really, really good time, you could do. But once you're trying to push for definitely at the point where you're trying to push for sub 20, there's not much that you can do to get around it.
That makes sense.
Gotcha. So Glitch Garden asks us, if there were a game that was just Run Roddy Tops, would y'all play it? I don't know who y'all is, but I think they mean us.
What if it would? I mean, I feel like at least the original Shantae did. The original Shantae had a mini game that was sort of equally frustrating. That one where you have to beat Roddy Tops in a race. I mean, it's always her. It's always Roddy Tops that's ruining the game.
Freaking Roddy Tops.
I mean, I feel like you could extend Run Roddy Tops out. I'd play it. I wouldn't like it, but I'd play it. I mean, I hate myself.
Yeah, I feel
I
like
guess
most
I'd play it.
speedrunners. Yeah,
I haven't played the real games, so I guess I probably wouldn't. I guess just based off of current evidence of what I have and haven't played, but I think it'd be kind of cool. I'd watch it for sure. I'd watch Auth do it and get really angry. That would be fun. I'd like that part.
You take pleasure in my suffering.
I like your
question is,
suffering.
do I lack the self-control and, let's be honest, the self-preservation instincts such that I would be willing to play that game? The answer is unfortunately.
Yeah.
Okay.
Apparently we all hate ourselves that much.
TFS Hall of Famer Rogue Link asks, what's your favorite song in this game?
I don't know any of them by name. I mean, for me,
I
it all
mean,
just
I
kind
don't
of
know
blends
off
together.
the top of my head.
It hasn't been recent enough that I've played it that I can pick out a specific location either. The music's just all really solid, and I think the nicest thing I could say about this game is that they don't have like a pronounced difference between the songs. Like, isn't that really what you want from a game soundtrack? Is it feels so seamless between transporting between areas.
The ones that stand out to me right now are the first level and the part where you're doing Roddy Tops.
Well, that's just
Pretty
because
like,
you end up, when you're playing the game casually, hearing that song for 30 minutes on end.
yeah. So I don't know. But yeah, same with Chad. Like none of them really stand out, but you've played this a lot, so I assume you might have one.
I do have an opinion here. I'm good at having opinions.
Nice. So is off.
So there's a song that is unfortunately really short-lived in the speedrun, which is a remix of a song from the first Shantae game.
Cool.
Whenever it turns night, there's this kind of intense song in the original Shantae, and Jake Kaufman took it and remixed it and did a really amazing job. And you hear a grand total of maybe 20 seconds of this song that was beautifully redone. And then you go on to beat the game.
Well, that's cool. That's nice of him to do.
So do you play it in your car when you're going to work?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay,
Nice.
That's what I would do. So the Sound Defense asks, would you say that this is a good introduction to speedrunning, or is it more advanced? So I mean, it's hard for me to
introduction to speedrunning.
Yeah,
Like would be a good first game.
I feel like this is a loaded question. So the Sound Defense ran this game at, was it Summer Games Done Quick? I forget which GDQ it was. But the Sound Defense ran this game at a GDQ. And I want to say that the Sound Defense said that it was a good first speedrun, and I do agree. It's a really fantastic first speedrun. It's forgiving enough that when you're first starting out, it remains fun. And then as you get more skilled at it and as you grind it down, it becomes more and more fluid. And you become, I feel like the curve of how hard the game is versus how fast you're trying to go tends to be pretty linear, and that's a good quality for especially a first speed game.
For sure.
Yeah, I feel like we don't talk about that enough in speed games, how nice it can be for a game to be both very easy but very difficult to optimize. Like my sort of go-to example for that has always been Super Mario World. It's like the most piss easy game you can imagine. I cannot imagine a game in the world too much easier than Super Mario World. But it just becomes miserable once you start trying to go that fast because
It's called Kirby's Dream Land.
the game punishes. Yeah, but Kirby's Dream Land's a bad game from start to finish. Come at me.
Wow.
I'm sorry. I mean,
Wow.
you can beat it casually in
I hope
16
that adorable
minutes.
little cream puff just sucks you up and steals whatever powers you got.
Hey, I
That's
didn't
what
say
I
Kirby was bad. Kirby's Adventure is fantastic. Kirby Superstar is fantastic. Kirby's Dream Land is a bad video game.
Wow. Okay. Well.
Sorry, I call him like I see him.
Hopefully, he bloody clean. Well, I don't think he likes the game.
I think he would agree with me. Melwing Games asks, how would Tina compare Pirate's Curse to Risky's Revenge in terms of difficulty?
Oh gosh. So I mentioned already the RNG aspect to Risky's Revenge. So the other side of this speedrun is again Ezko's fault. There's a trick called the Fireball Double Jump that you have to do. And what that entails is you get a spell called the Fireball, and it's a double frame perfect input to manage to do a wall jump up to a single block that you can get to. You get a transformation into a monkey at that point of the game. So you turn into a monkey, and then you have to make a relatively tight jump after that. You go out of bounds. You can't see what you're doing as you navigate completely out of bounds to a rung warp. And then at the very end of all that, there's another boss that's RNG, followed by another boss that you have to kill with a one-frame trick. It's punishing. It's punishing, and it's frustrating unless you have a very particular and special type of temperament.
What about just casually? How do they compare?
Casually, I would say that they're fairly similar. I mentioned that Risky's Revenge, the game that preceded Pirate's Curse, tends to be a very, very complex game just in terms of where you have to go. And the Pirate's Curse being as linear as it is most likely a response to people's not particularly liking, feeling like they were in a maze at pretty much all times.
Gotcha.
Other than that, though, just in terms of playing it casually, I would say that they're fairly similar. The Shantae games have always been good about that, though.
Okay. Mario Master 409 asks, who is Tina's favorite character in the Shantae series? I would answer this, but I think it's directed to Tina.
Yeah, it does say Tina in the question.
But I could still answer what I think.
I feel like all of us should have feelings about this one.
I have a lot of feelings.
So what's
Well,
I mean,
Tina's answer?
Shantae is my favorite.
She has to start.
It's not called Roddy Top's game. It's called Shantae, and Shantae's a babe. I don't know. I got crushed on Shantae.
Yeah, but they're pretty much all babes, aren't they?
Yeah,
Pretty
But
sure.
Risky has
Shantae's
always
the
been my
most-
girl.
She's adorable.
Yeah, Risky's the one.
Risky's my
Mm.
girl. Sorry.
She's a little too feisty for me. She's
I'm
a little
surprised.
bit too.
So Tina, your answer is Risky?
Yeah.
I'm actually surprised by that. I feel like in any group of people of any size, at least one person's going to say Roddy Tops. I never understood the fascination with Roddy. She's not my type. Sorry.
Yeah,
Roddy Top's every single game is a story of somebody just being a jerk to you for fun.
Yeah, I had to carry her all the way through that maze.
And
Yeah,
she's got that
I-
short hair.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on with that?
You know, like
That,
I
I
like
mean,
short
that doesn't
hair.
bug me. But again, I had to race her and then I had to carry her. And neither of those are okay in isolation. And both of those put together, I'm hoping that in the next sequel that comes out, you know, if you can maybe orchestrate her death, I'd be okay with that.
Wow.
Well, it's hard to kill her
that's
because
dark.
she's
Things
already
got
dead.
dark.
So
Yeah, that's
Ooh.
also true. I will say that I mean the game does over sexualize its characters a little bit.
little
But I
bit.
will say
Hell yeah, my
Shantae's
dude.
personality is super adorable, and I like that. I like the adorable one. I don't want the feisty one that's yelling at me all the time. That's risky. I don't want to be yelled at all the time. I don't know.
Risky looks like
she'd
she'd tell me.
made out of a slug.
Risky looks
She's
like
a-
she'd tell me what to do, and that's all right with me.
That's kind of what I was getting at. Okay, GS Cookie gets any weirder. Any hot safety tips for first-time runners?
Heart squids, they're slow, but they give you safety. Auto potions, they're expensive, but they give you safety. Auto potions are nice because anything that happens that's unexpected that kills you, you're just going to take a few seconds to fill your health back up, and then you're going to be good to go.
So is there anything in this game that really compares to like with A Link to the Past, for instance, is my go-to example. You know, when you learn the speedrun for that game, you kind of start out building a ton of safeties and then sort of slowly removing them one by one. Does this game have anything like that? Like maybe doing certain things in a different order? You already mentioned Heart Squid, so I imagine that would be your suggestion in that department. But is there anything else you can kind of do that alters the route from conceivably the world record route, but gives you those same sort of safeties?
Yeah, so more so than heart squids. Heart squids tend to be let go pretty early on. Most runners, after even just a few runs, are going to be running with 2 hearts, the minimum that you can have. But it tends to be the case that runners who are working at building up that skill, who need those safeties, will grind money in spots where you can respawn jars full of gems, and you can use those to purchase additional curatives, additional auto potions, things along those lines, additional attack items to just help you work your way through any enemies or bosses.
Definitely.
I have a hot question for you. You shoot like jars filled with money, but you don't like pick up the money. How do you get the money?
That's one thing that I guess we haven't mentioned about this. So in the other Shantae games, there's a spell that you can get called Attract Magic, which pulls things like money or pickups to you. In this game, you start with Attract Magic, which is in the form of a genie lamp that you get. And there's a button where you can hold up the lamp, and then it just pulls anything on screen that can be picked up that isn't too heavy to pull to you. So that's how you pick up the dark magic that was previously mentioned. It's how you pick up money. There's a couple of things like heart squids and so on that it's not going to pick up, but for the most part, that's what you tend
I
to do.
didn't know you could do that. I didn't do that casually. That would have been useful. That's good to know.
Yeah, it's mentioned that you can do that when you get taught how to use the lamp.
Yeah, John, it says it right in the game apparently.
Reading, huh?
So Jaren64
Story-driven
asks,
game.
Jaren64 asks, if you could ROM hack the game, what would you change? I've got a quick hot answer that I'm gonna steal before anyone else gives an equally lame answer. Remove Run Roddy Tops. All right, now you guys have to give a real answer. Sorry.
Yeah, I saw that one coming. There are definitely spots in the game, for example, the Pirates Tower skip, that I think taking those elements, for example, the fact that you use the hat and cannon to gain just a little bit more height than the devs ever actually intended, taking that and turning it into some challenge levels would be really quite interesting.
Like Super
finding
Mario
ways to.
Maker style, making it harder to use the tech to do stuff. That'd be cool.
I am a fan of Kaizo hack, so yeah.
My
Interesting.
answer is way worse than both those. I would replace Shantae with Emma Watson so I could have more Emma Watson in my life, and then the whole rest of the game could
Yeah,
be this.
didn't see that one coming.
Yep.
Weren't you
So
just complaining about the characters being over sexualized, and then you want to swap them out with someone you? Never mind. So Roguelink asks, "What's your favorite trick, and why is it taco jump?"
Oh gosh.
Also, what's a taco jump?
All right, so Taco Jump is named after Taconator, who was mentioned earlier in the list of places times. So Taco Jump is right at the end of Run Run, and it's a very tight jump that you have to make between 4 different enemies, essentially. 2 things that come down from the or from the ceiling, and 2 of these little tombstones that come to life and kill you. And it's a very tight jump, and it's very easy to lose about 45 seconds screwing it up. So it's not my favorite. I feel days of my life just draining out of my body every time that I go for Taco Jump, irrespective of whether or not I make it.
Well, it makes sense that it's named after Taconator, because if I see a taco, I ain't jumping. I'm eating that. You know what I'm saying? That's how I feel.
So I'm going to follow up that question with the other variant of that question, which is, what actually is your favorite trick, though? I mean, there's a lot of times when you're learning a speedrun, whether or not a trick saves a bunch of time, whether or not it's easy or hard, is kind of immaterial. Sometimes it's just, some tricks are just more fun to do than others. Like, you really enjoy either the demonstration or pulling off something impressive, or just in general it skips a part maybe that you enjoy skipping or something like that. Do you have a specific trick in this game that you really do enjoy doing more than the rest of the run?
So I'm going to give you 2 answers.
Nice.
Yeah, it's always great when you ask
2 for the price of
question and
1.
somebody, yeah, and then wow, you're spinning this way better than I was about to.
Yeah, the TFS.
So
that's like our bread and butter, is 2 for the price of 1. It's like, all these games suck, put them together in an episode.
Yeah, fair enough. So the first example that I'm going to give is there's one particular area where you can hold a run all the way from the very start of it until about the midway point where you have to talk to a character.
Okay.
But if you do it correctly, and it is fairly difficult to do, this is in about 3/4 of the way through the game in a place called Mudbog Island. But you can keep this run all the way up to where you talk to death, essentially. And it's relatively tough, and it's one of the later things that I learned to do consistently as a speedrun. And it's one of the tricks that most people seem to struggle with the most. But once you start getting it, it just feels fantastic to get it time and time again.
So it skips a whole conversation?
It doesn't skip anything. It gets you through a very dangerous area.
It's just maintaining your momentum
Gotcha.
all the way from one point all the way halfway through the level, basically.
Gotcha.
Right. So, and it's one of those things where all the enemies, if you lose that momentum, all the enemies here are going to do 4+ quarters of a heart of damage. So at least half your health. It's really quite scary.
Okay.
Related to that, just in terms of keeping momentum, the other answer that I'm going to give you is momentumless boots. It doesn't save much time. It's just a couple seconds. But every time that you manage to get that jump, knowing that it is properly frame perfect, it sets off something that makes you feel real good inside.
I will say,
Nice.
watching the run, I think my favorite part of the movement to watch is when you have a ton of momentum and then you're using the cannon stuff. I'm sure it's very simple and probably isn't a challenge, but it always looks cool when you're just flying across levels, cannon shooting your way through it. Maybe it's just the animation that the game gives, but I don't know. It just looks really cool.
Look, you can't solve
that's
all
where
your
the stuff
problems
is
in
very
life by
well.
shooting cannons.
Yeah, I mean, you can solve a lot of them. Like,
Yeah, it turns
Like
out that
gravity.
there are a lot of problems that cannons solve.
Yeah. So that is our Q&A. We appreciate all you guys for hanging out and asking us these amazing questions. For Tina coming on, Tina Hacks, where can they find you? Not that we don't plug you every episode, actually. Where can they find you?
So I do speedruns almost every day at twitch.tv/TinaHacks.
What have you been playing lately most?
For the most part, I've been playing Final Fantasy VI lately. I've been dragged back into Super Mario World, which is
Yeah, that's
Yeesh.
weird.
exactly as pleasant as it sounds.
I would like to say that Tina beat the #1 seed in the tournament, making her king of.
Is that how it works?
Yes.
I was pretty sure
You
that it
kill
just.
the king, you become the king. That's how
Oh
it works.
wow!
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Oh,
actually
congrats.
get all of his
Do I get a
PBs now.
throne?
You do
Oh,
get a
wow.
throne.
He had a world record at one point. Does that mean I'm a former world record?
Former
You get all
world
his
record holder.
records.
I'm
You get-
okay with that.
You get all of his women, you get all his money, you get all the things he has, all his goats.
Wow,
All
I
of
get
it's
his
yours
goats.
now. Yeah, all of it is
He's
yours now.
Australian, and my understanding is that their currency is primarily backed by goats.
Okay, well there you go.
It's a
However
shame
many
I've had my
goats
eye
of
on
money
those
he
goats,
has,
so-
that's now your goat money. Congrats.
That's fantastic. I'm excited.
That's
And
awesome.
the Dragon's Trap coming up at AGQ 2018.
That's right. That's the other thing that you can find me doing on my channel right now, and certainly up to and through AGDQ, I'm going to be doing plenty of Wonder Boy the Dragon's Trap, which is just a fantastic speedrun. It's super fun.
It
Yeah, that
may
game's
sound like
really
that's a
cool.
year away because it has 2018 on it, but that's actually only a few weeks away. Definitely be ready to tune in for that.
I thought it was interesting when you were talking about the risky shuffle. Hitting those deep tracks. When you're talking about the risky shuffle, you were describing how it works. That's like exactly the same way that the flying glitch works in
Yes,
Dragon's
it
Trap.
is.
It's almost as if you've picked both of those games intentionally because they have a trick that you're already familiar with how to do.
So it's not. In fact, I only picked up the Dragon's Trap because you and I, the day after it was released, did a blind race of it, and it was tremendous fun. And I'm looking forward to Author Blues doing.
Yes, I'm looking forward to future Author Blues doing that one day too.
Yeah. Future Author Blues does a lot on his like basically every speed game that's ever come out.
Yeah,
Will
he's
happen eventually apparently.
he's pretty good at things eventually.
So definitely follow Tina. Huge shout outs to all of our patrons on patreon.com/theframesavers. That's where we get the monies to make this happen. We have to pay hosting fees. We have to pay for editing, all kinds of different things. So thank you guys so much for your support. Huge shout outs to our two $25 a month people. One of them is Tina Hacks. You can find her on twitch.tv/Tina Hacks. We're just going to say that again so you can go follow her. She's a big deal. Huge shout outs to Mr. Pizak. That's MRPZAK. He does a bunch of NES 8-bit speedruns of the sort. Go give him a follow as well. But thank you guys so much for your continued support there. If you want to support us, go to patreon.com/theframesavers, or you can go to iTunes or Stitcher or SoundCloud, wherever we're found, and give us a good positive review. We don't really get very many reviews. Most podcasts don't. It's hard to convert plays into views because nobody wants to log in to iTunes and actually leave a review, but it does help us. So if you can do that, that'd be great.
No one wants to log into iTunes.
Yeah. Chad, my friend, my good friend, where can they find you if they want to watch all the games you've promised to do in the future?
Well, don't hold me to any contract for anything I said I promised to do, because I've said I promised to do a lot of things. You can find me on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube at Author Blues, and I play some video games, and some of them actually go fast. How can they find you, though, Mr. John?
You can find me on Twitch and Twitter as John Carls. You can find me on YouTube as John Carls1. Also, you can find all of the Framesaver stuff at theframesavers.com. It has links to our iTunes, our SoundCloud, our Discord, where you can hang out, ask us questions. That's where we generally get our Q&A. And you can see when episodes get posted and such through Twitter and through Discord. Please give a follow to Brian Morgenthau, our producer, who makes this podcast sound great. You can find him at BMorgsTV on Twitter and Twitch. And as always, just thank you so much for being the best listeners. You guys never complain. You just listen to whatever we put out. It could be a game that nobody cares about. It could be, the most important game ever. You guys are still listening, and we appreciate it so much. So thank you so much. Thanks so much to Tina Hacks for coming on and killing it, as always, just keeping it fresh. And yeah, go listen to some Shantae music. Go play Shantae the game. Go get Shantae tattoos. Just do all the things that are Shantae.
Peace.
See ya.